My name is David Miller. I'm 45 years old, and if you had met me 2 years ago, you might have thought I had it all figured out. A comfortable home in a quiet suburb of Columbus, Ohio. 2 kids I adored, a wife I believed in, and a business I had built from the ground up. From the outside it looked solid, but sometimes the foundation starts cracking long before you notice. That Friday night, it was raining, one of those steady Midwestern rains that make the streets shine under the streetlights. I came home earlier than expected from a meeting out of town. I had this picture in my head, surprising my family, maybe ordering pizza, watching a movie with the kids. Instead, I stepped into a house that smelled faintly of the lavender candles my wife always lit, but felt off. She wasn't in the living room. No TV on. I heard faint music coming from upstairs, not the classic rock she usually played, but something soft, romantic. I set my bag down quietly, heading toward the stairs, thinking maybe she was on the phone with her sister or a friend. Halfway up, I heard her laugh. Light, carefree, and not meant for me. I froze. "You're so predictable," she said, her voice low but carrying enough for me to hear. I moved closer, each step feeling heavier. "A walking bank account," she went on. "Once the divorce is final, it'll be free and it'll have everything." I didn't make a sound. Years of running a business had taught me to keep my face still even when the numbers came in bad. I stood in the hallway, my back against the wall, listening. "Yes, Robert, of course I thought it through. My lawyer says he'll get half of everything, including his shares in the company. He doesn't suspect a thing." Each word cut through me like glass. Not just the affair, not just the lies, but the fact that she'd been planning this for months, calculating every move. "The kids will adjust," she laughed. "Besides, you're so much more fun than he is." That was the lie that stung most. It'd been at every soccer game, every school play, every parent-teacher conference. She was the one who couldn't make it half the time. I backed away from the doorway without her knowing he'd been there. Walked down the stairs, out the front door, into the rain. Sat in my truck for a long time, hands on the wheel, breathing slow. I wasn't going to explode. That's what she would expect, an emotional outburst she could use against me. No, I was going to do this my way, with strategy. An hour later, I came back in, making sure the door closed loud enough for her to hear. "I'm home," I called. She came down the stairs smiling like she'd been smiling at me for years. "You're back early." "Finished sooner than expected," I said, letting her kiss my cheek. My son ran up to hug me. "Dad, Mom said we could have pizza tonight." I picked him up, held him tighter than usual. "Of course, buddy." My daughter followed, quieter, taller than I remembered, her eyes searching mine like she could sense something had shifted. Through dinner, I laughed at the right moments, asked about their day, pretended not to notice my wife checking her phone every few minutes. Later that night, when the kids were asleep, I sat at my desk, opened my laptop not to work, but to take notes. Names, dates, bank accounts, every asset we had, and every move I needed to make. Because if she wanted a war, I was going to give her one, but it wouldn't be the kind she was expecting. Have you ever discovered, in silence, that the person you trusted most was planning your downfall? That the life you thought was real was already being dismantled behind your back? Share your story in the comments. You never know, it might help someone else realize. Then, for the next week, I lived 2 lives. On the surface, I was the same husband, father, and business owner everyone knew. I got up on time, made breakfast for the kids, went to the office, came home, and ate dinner with my family. Underneath, every hour was spent quietly pulling together the puzzle pieces of what my wife had been hiding. I started with the obvious, her phone. I knew her passcode, though I'd never used it before. Late at night, when she was in the shower, I picked it up from the nightstand and opened it. The text thread with Robert was right there at the top. I didn't scroll for long, just enough to screenshot the messages and email them to a secure account she didn't know about. The tone was always the same, intimate, excited, and calculated. They talked about selling our house, buying a new one together, and waiting until the papers are signed before taking the kids on a trip to Florida. Then I went after financial records. I had full access to our joint accounts, but not all of her personal ones. Still, bank statements arrive in the mail, and I began collecting them quietly. A few late-night credit card charges to upscale restaurants in downtown Columbus. A weekend charge at a boutique hotel in Cincinnati on a weekend, Shed told me she was visiting a friend from college. 2 nights later, she said she had a girls' night plan. I told her to have fun, even offered her my car since hers needed gas. As soon as she left, I logged into our home computer, which automatically backed up her phone's photos. There they were, pictures of her and Robert at a winery, in front of a lake house, on a rooftop bar. Dates stamped right across the corner. I stored everything on a small, encrypted drive I bought the next day. That drive never left my briefcase. By Wednesday, I had a plan. In Ohio, adultery can still be grounds for divorce, and though it doesn't automatically decide who gets what, it can heavily influence spousal support, custody, and the division of property. That I wasn't going to stop at proving she cheated. I needed more leverage. And that's when a thought hit me that made my stomach drop. The kids. It was irrational at first. It'd been there from day one. It'd seen them born, held them in my arms, taught them to ride bikes, to tie their shoes. But now, with everything else I knew, I couldn't ignore the possibility that the lies went deeper. The next morning, I called a private DNA testing service in Columbus. They told me they could use toothbrushes for the kids' samples and mine for comparison. I booked it immediately. That night, while my wife was distracted on a video call with her sister, I swapped out both kids' toothbrushes for new ones and sealed the originals in separate plastic bags. 3 days later, I dropped the samples at the lab. They promised results in a week. That week was the longest of my life. Meanwhile, my wife's behavior only confirmed my suspicions. She started talking about reassessing our future and making big changes for the sake of the kids. She began suggesting we might live apart for a while to figure things out. It was all dressed up in concern, but I could see the real play to push me out gently while she finalized her plan. On the 6th day, the email from the lab came in. I locked my office door before opening it. 2 lines, clear as day. Probability of paternity for child 10%. Probability of paternity for child to 0%. I read it twice. My hands were steady, but my chest felt like it was collapsing inward. Neither of them was biologically mine. For several minutes, I couldn't think. I just sat there, staring at the screen. Memories of their first steps, first words, school plays, sick days when I stayed up all night, they came in waves. And then the truth settled in. Biology or not, they were still my kids. That their mother had stolen from me the right to know the truth. That night, I watched them at dinner differently. My daughter, 16, talking about a project for school, her eyes bright with determination. My son, 12, asking if we could play catch after. They were mine in every way that mattered, and I wasn't going to let her take them from me, no matter what the DNA said. But now, I had something I never expected, the ultimate leverage. She thought she could bleed me dry in court, take half of everything, and still control the kids. She had no idea I could walk in with proof that they weren't even legally mine. I wasn't going to use it to hurt the kids, never. That I could use it to take away her power. 2 days later, I found the perfect moment to set the first stage. It learned she was meeting Robert for dinner at a steakhouse in the Short North District. I booked a table at the bar, close enough to see them, but far enough not to be noticed. They arrived laughing, dressed like they were celebrating. She wore a new dress he'd never seen before. Robert had his arm draped over her chair. I waited until their entrees arrived, then stood and walked over. Evening, I said, looking directly at her. Robert, I presume? He looked me over like he was ready for a fight. Yeah, and you are? Her husband, I said. Soon to be ex. I set a plain white envelope on the table between them. A gift, for the occasion. She eyed it, suspicious. What's this supposed to be? Open it when you're alone, I said. You'll find it enlightening. I walked out without another word, paid my tab at the bar, and waited in my truck where I could see the restaurant's front door. 15 minutes later, they came out fast, arguing. She was gripping the envelope in one hand, her face pale. Robert pulled away from her, shaking his head, and got into his own car. I didn't need to hear the words. I knew the effect those test results would have. For the first time since this all began, I felt the balance shift. It wasn't over, not even close, but she was no longer the one holding all the cards. The fallout started almost immediately. The morning after I'd left the envelope on their dinner table, my phone lit up with call after call from my wife. I let them all go to voicemail. When I finally listened, her voice was tight, almost trembling, not with guilt, but with anger. "You think you're so clever," she spat in one message. "Robert won't even talk to me now. Is that what you wanted? To ruin everything?" She had no idea that ruining everything was exactly the point. Later that day, a different number popped up on my phone. Against my better judgment, I answered. "This is Robert," the voice said, clipped and tense. "We need to talk." I stepped into my office and closed the door. "I'm listening." "I don't know what game you and she are playing," he said, "but I'm out. And for the record, I didn't know about the other men." I stayed silent. He went on. "Look, those kids, are they mine? Either of them?" "No," I told him flatly. "The tests only prove they're not mine. If you want to know about you, you'll have to get your own done." There was a pause, then a muttered curse. "Jesus, what a mess. Anyway, I'm done with her. She's your problem now." "Not for long," I reply. That conversation confirmed what I'd already suspected. She was alone now. No backup, no partner to reassure her. And I was ready to make my next move. The following week, I sat in my attorney's office, laying out every piece of evidence: the affair, the financial records, the hidden hotel charges, and the paternity results. In Ohio, the law doesn't automatically strip custody from a cheating spouse, but paternity fraud is serious leverage. My attorney explained exactly how we could use it to renegotiate the terms of any divorce settlement. "She's not going to walk away with half your assets," he said, tapping the file. "Not after this. And if she pushes for custody, we can challenge it hard. She won't risk that fight once she knows how deep this goes." We filed our petition within days. The court would be notified that I was challenging not just the divorce terms, but also my legal paternity. It wasn't about rejecting the kids. I made that clear to my lawyer. I would continue to be their father in every way that mattered. But this made it clear she wouldn't be able to use them as leverage for money. When the papers were served, she showed up at my office unannounced. Her face was flushed, her hands clenched into fists. "How could you?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "How could I?" I kept my tone calm, measured. "How could you, for years, lie to me about who those kids' father is? How could you sit in our home, at our table, planning to take everything I've built?" "I never wanted it to be like this," she said, tears welling up. "No," I said, "you wanted it to be easy for you. But it's not going to be." She stared at me for a long moment, as if realizing for the first time that I wasn't bluffing. Then she turned and left without another word. That night, I sat with my daughter in the living room, while my son worked on his homework at the table. She'd noticed the tension, of course she had. "Dad," she said quietly, "is Mom moving out?" "Yes," I told her honestly. "Things are changing, but you and your brother will be okay. I promise." She studied my face for a moment, then nodded. "As long as we're with you." Her words hit me harder than anything her mother had said. It was a reminder of why I was doing this. Not for revenge, though that was part of it, but to protect the life we still had, the bond we'd built despite everything. The war had shifted. Now was on my terms, and I intended to see it through to the end. The court date for our preliminary hearing was set for a Tuesday morning in early spring. In Ohio, these initial hearings don't settle everything, but they set the tone: temporary custody, temporary financial arrangements, and a roadmap for the rest of the proceedings. I arrived early with my attorney, a thick binder of evidence in hand. My wife, soon-to-be ex, walked in 10 minutes later with her lawyer. She was dressed sharply, hair perfectly styled, but her eyes betrayed a mix of exhaustion and defiance. The judge began by asking both sides to outline their positions. Her attorney went first, painting her as a devoted mother who had simply fallen out of love and wanted a fair split of assets so she could rebuild her life. He avoided mentioning the affair entirely. Then it was our turn. My attorney was calm, almost surgical. He outlined the affair, the financial discrepancies, and then, without raising his voice, introduced the paternity test results into the record. The courtroom went silent for a moment. "Your Honor," my attorney said, "these results establish that my client is not the biological father of either child. While he has every intention of continuing his parental relationship with them, this fact is central to the financial and custodial aspects of this case. It also raises serious concerns about the credibility and honesty of the opposing party." Her lawyer objected, trying to frame it as a personal matter irrelevant to the proceedings. But the judge leaned forward. "Mistress Miller, did you know your husband was not the biological father?" She hesitated too long and then said, "I wasn't sure." That hesitation was all it took. The judge noted it in the record and ordered that the financial arrangements be reconsidered in light of the new information. He also granted me temporary primary custody, citing stability and my consistent role in the children's lives. When the hearing ended, she stormed past me in the hallway. "You're destroying me," she hissed. "No," I said quietly. "You did that yourself." In the weeks that followed, the court's temporary orders shifted the entire dynamic. I had the kids during the week and every other weekend. She had visitation, but her time was limited, and she could no longer use them as leverage. Financially, she was cornered. The judge froze joint accounts until the final division could be decided, and she had no access to my business accounts at all. The credit cards in her name were her only lifeline, and I knew from the statements that they were close to maxed out. Meanwhile, I kept documenting everything. Every missed visitation, every inappropriate comment she made to the kids about me, every time she tried to circumvent the court's orders. My attorney told me I was building an unshakable case not just for protecting my assets, but for full custody if it came to that. One Saturday afternoon, while the kids were with her, I got a call from an unknown number. It was Robert. "She showed up at my place," he said without preamble. "Tried to get me to help her out financially." I told her no. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I don't want her dragging me into whatever mess you two have going on. And I thought you should know she's desperate." It was useful information, but I didn't react. "Noted," I said. By the time summer rolled around, she was looking worn down. At exchanges, she'd avoid eye contact. The kids noticed too. My daughter stayed polite but distant with her. My son, still young enough to want peace, tried to keep things light, but I could see the strain. One evening, after I dropped them at her apartment for visitation, she stopped me at the door. "David, can we talk?" I crossed my arms. "About what?" "About ending this without more damage. We could agree on terms, avoid another round in court." "What terms?" She hesitated, then offered a settlement. She'd drop any claim to my business if I gave her a larger share of our savings and agreed to joint custody. It was tempting to close the chapter quickly, but my attorney's voice echoed in my head. "Don't give up leverage until you have to." "I'll think about it," I said, knowing full well I wouldn't accept. As I drove away, I realized something had shifted again. She was no longer on the offensive. She was negotiating from a place of weakness, trying to salvage what she could. The war wasn't over yet, but the outcome was becoming clearer by the day, and I intended to make sure that when it was done, there would be nothing left for her to use against me ever again. The final trial date was set for late September. By then, nearly a year had passed since I'd first overheard her on the phone with Robert. Every step I'd taken since that night had been calculated, and now it was time to put it all on the record. The week before court, my attorney and I spent hours in his office going over every exhibit. The photos of her and Robert together, the bank statements with the hotel and restaurant charges, the paternity test results, the emails I'd pulled from our shared laptop, where she'd written to a friend about finally being free and getting half of everything he owns. We rehearsed my testimony until it was second nature. I was to keep my voice calm, my answers concise, and my focus always on the facts. Emotion could make me look vindictive, facts would make me look credible. On the morning of the trial, the courthouse in downtown Columbus felt colder than usual. She arrived with her lawyer, wearing a navy suit and an expression that was somewhere between defiance and fear. Robert wasn't with her. I wondered if he even knew today was the day. The proceedings began with opening statements. Her lawyer tried to frame me as an emotionally distant husband who had prioritized work over family. He spoke about her years of sacrifice as a stay-at-home mom, and argued she deserved half of everything plus spousal support to rebuild her life. Then my attorney stood. "Your Honor, this case is not about a couple who grew apart. It is about deliberate deception that spanned over a decade and affected every major decision in this marriage." He walked the judge through the evidence one piece at a time. The affair, the concealed spending, the pattern of lying, and then the paternity fraud. When the paternity test results were entered into evidence, the room seemed to shift. The judge looked directly at her. Mistress Miller, did you knowingly misrepresent the paternity of these children to your husband? She swallowed hard. I wasn't sure at the time. My attorney didn't miss a beat. Yet you never disclosed that possibility in 16 years of marriage. Instead, you allowed my client to believe he was their biological father while you engaged in multiple extramarital affairs. Her lawyer tried to object, but the judge overruled. The rest of the day was a blur of testimony, exhibits, and cross-examination. She tried to downplay her relationship with Robert, calling it a friendship that became something more toward the end of the marriage. But the timestamps on the photos and messages told a different story. When it was my turn to testify, I kept my voice steady. I spoke about my commitment to the kids, my role in their daily lives, and my decision to continue being their father regardless of biology. I made it clear that my issue was with her deception and the financial consequences, not with the children themselves. By late afternoon, both sides had rested. The judge announced that he would issue his decision within 2 weeks. As we left the courtroom, she walked quickly ahead of me, not looking back. I didn't try to speak to her. There was nothing left to say. That evening, I took the kids out for ice cream. They didn't ask about court, and I didn't bring it up. Sitting there, watching them laugh over who got more sprinkles, I felt the weight of the day lift slightly. Whatever the judge decided, I knew I'd done everything I could to protect them and myself from the fallout of her betrayal. 2 weeks later, the decision came in the mail, and as I read it, I realized that this chapter of my life was finally about to close. The judge's decision was as clear as it was final. Divorce granted on grounds of fault. Full primary custody of both children awarded to me, with her having standard visitation every other weekend. No spousal support. Division of assets heavily weighted in my favor. I kept the house my business, and the bulk of our savings. Her share was limited to certain personal items and a modest settlement, far less than what she had planned for when this began. When I finished reading the order, I set it down on the kitchen table and just sat there for a few minutes, letting it sink in. Imagined this moment so many times over the past year, but I thought it'd feel triumphant. Instead, what I felt was a deep, quiet relief. The kids were in the living room playing a video game when I called them over. I told them we could finally move forward, that the legal process was over. My daughter nodded, almost like she'd been expecting it. My son asked if it meant things would go back to normal. I told him normal might look a little different now, but yes, we'd have peace again. Her reaction came quickly. That evening, she texted me, "Congratulations. You got what you wanted. I hope you're satisfied." I didn't reply. There was nothing to be gained from engaging. Over the next few weeks, her visits with the kids were polite but strained. She had moved into a small apartment across town. Nothing like the home she had pictured when she'd started her plan with Robert. Sometimes she tried to chat with me at drop-off, but I kept it to logistics, pick-up times, school, updates, nothing personal. Then, one Saturday afternoon, she showed up at my door unexpectedly. The kids were in the backyard, and she stood there on the porch, looking smaller somehow. "Can we talk?" she asked. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. "About what?" She took a breath. "I can't afford the apartment. I've been applying for jobs, but nothing steady yet. I'm falling behind. I thought maybe you could help me, just until I get back on my feet." I looked at her, remembering every calculated word I'd overheard that night on the phone with Robert. Every plan she'd made to take what I had built. "The court order is clear," I said. "You have your settlement. You can work like I did to build something for yourself." Her jaw tightened. "It's for the kids' sake. If I can't keep this place, where will they stay during visits? I'm not going to let them go without a safe place when they're with you," I said. "If it comes to it, it'll cover part of the rent for 6 months. But it'll be in my name, and you'll be responsible for everything else. And you're going to need to find work." She hesitated, then nodded. "Fine." That was the last conversation we had that had any trace of cooperation in it. In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding life with the kids. I changed the layout of the living room, repainted their bedrooms, and even adopted a rescue dog they'd been asking about for years. The house felt lighter. The laughter came back. Every now and then, I'd catch myself thinking about Robert, wondering if he ever thought about the damage he'd helped cause, even if he'd walked away from her. But mostly, I didn't care anymore. What mattered was right here, to kids who, regardless of DNA, were mine in every way that counted. 6 months after the divorce was final, she called one evening. Her voice was different, steadier, almost resigned. She told me she'd finally found steady work as an office assistant. She also said she was moving to another city an hour away, to be closer to her job. I'll still come for my weekends, she said. I'm trying to do better. I told her I hoped she would, not for me, but for the kids. After I hung up, I stood for a long time at the kitchen window, looking out at the yard where my son was throwing a ball for the dog, and my daughter was stretched out on the grass, earbuds in. The storm we'd been through had changed all of us, but it hadn't broken us. The betrayal, the lies, the courtroom battles, all of it was in the past now. What lay ahead was ours to shape, and I intended to make sure it was something worth keeping. Life settled into a new rhythm after she moved an hour away. The kids and I fell into a comfortable routine: school during the week, quiet evenings at home, soccer games on Saturdays for my son, study sessions and art projects for my daughter. Her weekends with them became predictable: pickups on Friday evening, drop-offs on Sunday night, and more last-minute changes or manipulative texts. At first, the kids came back from those weekends quiet, a little withdrawn. I didn't pry, just gave them space. Slowly, they began to open up on their own. My daughter admitted she mostly stayed in her room at her mother's place, reading or working on homework. My son said she was different now, not mean exactly, but sad all the time. It was strange to hear. This was the same woman who a year ago had been so confident in her plan to walk away with half my life. Now she was diminished, struggling to keep even a small apartment and a steady job. I didn't take joy in that, but I couldn't ignore the justice in it either. One Friday evening, during a handoff, she lingered at the door. "David," she said quietly, "I'm thinking about asking the court for more time with the kids. Maybe an extra overnight during the week." I kept my voice even. "If that's what you want, file the motion." But the court's decision last fall was based on stability for them. They're doing well right now. I don't see a reason to change that. Her eyes flickered with frustration, but she didn't push it further. That night, after the kids had gone to bed, I sat in my office looking over the thick binder I still kept on the shelf. Every document, every photo, every piece of evidence from the case was in there. I hadn't opened it in months, but I couldn't quite bring myself to throw it away. It wasn't about holding a grudge, it was a reminder of what happens when you stop paying attention, when you trust someone so completely you forget they're capable of destroying you. A few weeks later, I got a call from Robert. His number popping up was enough to make my stomach tighten, though I answered anyway. "I heard she's talking about taking you back to court," he said without preamble. "She can try it," I reply. "Why are you telling me this?" He hesitated, then sighed. "Because I don't want to see the kids dragged into another fight. And she's been reaching out to me again. I'm not interested, but I figured you should know." It didn't surprise me. She'd burned her bridges in so many places. She was probably circling back to the only people who knew her well enough to understand her patterns. "Thanks for the heads up," I said. That weekend, I sat the kids down, not to tell them about Robert's call, but to reinforce what mattered, that their lives here were steady, that nothing was going to change without good reason, and that I'd keep it that way as long as I could. My daughter met my eyes and said, "I know you will, Dad. You always do." It struck me that this wasn't just about surviving what she'd done to me. It was about showing them what it looks like to stand your ground without becoming bitter. To fight when you have to, but to live well the rest of the time. And for the first time since the day I overheard her voice upstairs, I realized I wasn't living in reaction to her anymore. I was simply living. By the time spring came around, nearly a year and a half had passed since I'd first discovered her betrayal. The sharp edges of that night had worn down, but I still remembered every detailed tone of her voice, the words she used, the cold calculation. I remembered not because it still hurt, but because it reminded me how far I'd come. The kids were thriving. My daughter had been accepted into an early college program for her senior year, and my son had made the travel soccer team. I was there for every practice, every game, every late-night project. They didn't have to wonder if he'd show up. That was something I could give them, no matter what else had happened. Her visits remained consistent but limited. The 1-hour drive seemed to keep her from making casual drop-ins, and the court order gave me the final say on any changes. It kept things predictable, and predictability was exactly what the kids needed. One Sunday evening, when she dropped them off, she lingered a moment longer than usual. "David," she said, "I'm thinking of taking a new job. It's in Chicago." I didn't react outwardly, but I knew that was a big shift. "What about your weekends with the kids?" "I'd still fly back twice a month," she said, "and maybe they could come to me for longer during school breaks." "That's something you'll need to put in writing if you want it considered," I told her. Her eyes searched mine. "I'm not trying to take them away from you. I know I can't. I want to have something for myself again." I gave a small nod. "Do what you have to do. Just make sure you keep your promises to them." 2 weeks later, she texted to confirm she'd accepted the job. I could tell from the way the kids reacted, my son curious about what Chicago is like, my daughter indifferent that her move wasn't going to cause any major disruption here. Life went on. I worked, cooked dinners, helped with homework. On weekends without the kids, I started taking small trips, a fishing weekend with friends, a visit to see my brother in Cincinnati. I was rediscovering the parts of myself that had nothing to do with her, the parts that had been buried under years of constant damage control. Then, in late May, I got a letter. Handwritten, my name on the envelope in a script I hadn't seen in years except on court documents. I didn't open it right away. I set it on my desk, finished paying a few bills, and only then picked it up. Inside, her words were surprisingly measured. She wrote about the mistakes she'd made, about how she'd been selfish and blind during our marriage. She admitted that losing so much a relationship with Robert, the home financial security, had been the wake-up call she never wanted but probably needed. She ended the letter by saying she wasn't asking for forgiveness, because she knew she hadn't earned it. She only wanted me to know she was trying to live differently now. I read it twice, then folded it and put it back in the envelope. I didn't feel the urge to respond, and I didn't feel angry either. It was simply done. The chapter was closed. That weekend, the kids and I grilled in the backyard. My son chased the dog around the grass while my daughter sat at the table, talking about her plans for college. The sun dipped low, painting the sky orange and gold. I realized then that my life no longer revolved around what she had done to me. I wasn't checking over my shoulder, waiting for the next strike. I wasn't bracing for another round in court. I was just here, with my kids, building something steady. The binder of evidence still sat on the shelf in my office, but it was gathering dust. And I knew that someday soon, I'd throw it out, not because I'd forgotten what happened, but because it no longer defined me. She had tried to dismantle my life piece by piece. Instead, I'd rebuilt it stronger, quieter, and entirely on my own terms. And as I watched my kids laugh in the fading light, I understood the real victory wasn't in what I'd kept from her. It was in what I'd kept for us. By summer, Chicago had fully claimed her. She'd sold most of what she owned to make the move, and from what the kids told me, her apartment there was small but nicer than the last one. My son described the skyline, the lake, the crowded streets, when he visited for the first time over spring break. My daughter still refused to go, politely but firmly, and the court order allowed her to make that choice. The physical distance seemed to ease whatever tension had lingered. Our text exchanges were limited to logistics, flight times, school updates, health information for the kids. No accusations, no guilt trips. It was transactional, and that was fine with me. One Friday evening in July, she called instead of texting. "David, I wanted you to hear it from me before the kids say anything. I've started seeing someone." It was a statement, not a question. "As long as he treats them well when they're with you, that's your business," I said. She hesitated. "He's different. Stable. I'm not making the same mistakes again." "I hope not," I reply, meaning it more for the kids' sake than hers. The following weekend, my son mentioned Mom's friend taking them to a baseball game in Chicago. He seemed to enjoy it, and there was no edge in his voice. That was all I needed to know. Back home, life was steady. My daughter was deep into college applications, and my son was training hard for fall soccer. I found myself thinking less and less about the past, not because it was gone, but because it no longer occupied space in the life I was living now. One evening, as I grilled on the back patio, my neighbor leaned over the fence. "Man, I don't know how you did it," he said. "If my wife had pulled half that stuff, it'd still be a wreck." I shrugged. "You don't get to choose what happens to you. You only get to choose what you do after. It struck me that I actually believed those words now. In late August, I finally took the binder of evidence off the shelf in my office. I sat with it for a while, flipping through the pages one last time. Photos, the statements, the test results. Every piece had been a weapon once. Now, they were just paper. I put the binder in a box with other old files and carried it to the garage. That weekend, during a neighborhood cleanup day, I fed the whole box into the community shredder truck. Watching the pages disappear into the machine felt cleaner than I expected. That night, my daughter came into the kitchen while I was making coffee. "You seem lighter," she said. "Maybe I am," I told her. "Sometimes you have to let go of the proof to prove to yourself it's over." She smiled faintly. "I'm glad you did. I think we're all better off now." And standing there, I realized she was right. We were. By the time fall arrived, the rhythms of our lives felt solid again. The chaos, the uncertainty, the constant bracing for the next blow was all in the past now. The kids had settled into the school year. I was closing a strong quarter at the business, and the house felt like a place of peace rather than a battleground. Chicago was her world now. She still came back twice a month for her weekends with our son, and those exchanges were civil, if not warm. My daughter continued to keep her distance, choosing instead to spend those weekends with friends or working on college essays. I never pushed her, that bridge would be rebuilt or not, and it wasn't my job to force it. One Saturday evening in October, I was sitting on the back porch with a cup of coffee when my phone buzzed. It was a text from her. "I'm in town a few extra days for work. Could we meet without the kids? Just to talk?" I stared at it for a while before replying. "About what?" "Closure," she wrote back, "and to thank you for not shutting me out of their lives completely." We met the next afternoon at a quiet coffee shop downtown. She looked different, thinner, her hair cut shorter, a kind of worn-out calm in her face. "I know I don't deserve much from you," she began, hands wrapped around her cup, "but I wanted to say I've been working hard to fix my life. I'm not looking for anything from you, money, favors, nothing like that. Just I wanted to acknowledge the damage I caused." I listened without interrupting. "I lost Robert. I lost the life I thought I'd have, and I almost lost the kids. That's on me," she continued. "I can't undo it, but I can try to be better from here on." When she stopped, I said simply, "The kids will always need a mother. If you show up for them, that's what matters now." She nodded, her eyes a little glassy. "I'm trying." We talked for another 15 minutes about the kids' schedules, school events, and her new job. Then we stood, shook hands, and walked out. It was a reconciliation, not in the romantic or even personal sense, but it was a truce. That evening, after I'd made dinner and the kids were at the table, I realized something important. Her apology didn't change the past, but it no longer had to. I didn't need her to carry my anger anymore. I'd put it down a long time ago without realizing it. The weeks that followed were uneventful in the best way possible. My daughter got early acceptance into her first choice college. My son scored the winning goal in a big soccer match, and we celebrated with pizza and ice cream. Even the dog seemed to sense the lighter mood in the house. Thanksgiving came, and for the first time in years, I hosted both sides of the family. She wasn't invited, it wasn't the kind of peace we had, but the day was full of laughter, and I didn't once feel the shadow of the past hovering over us. One night in early December, after the kids had gone to bed, I stood in my office looking out the window at the quiet street. The binder of evidence was gone, the court case was long over, and the woman who had once tried to dismantle my life was a distant figure in another city. What remained was this: to kids who trusted me, a business it protected, a home that felt safe, and a life it rebuilt from the ground up. I thought about all the men and women who go through something like this. So easy it is to believe you'll never recover, that the betrayal will define you forever. But it doesn't have to. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: you can't control the storm, but you can decide what you build when it passes. And if you build it right, the storm can't touch it again. I turned off the light, closed the office door, and went upstairs. In the quiet of that night, I realized I had finally done what I thought was impossible when all this began. I had moved on, completely. Not just from her, but from the man I had been when she betrayed me. I was someone new now. And that, more than anything the court had given me, was the real victory.